This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us once again Dr. Buck Melton. Welcome,
Greetings.
Buck. We've had a lot of conversations on different subjects. Well, it would appear that neither of us were elected president. I mean, despite, whatever, that's the way it goes. And we do.
If only you had reconsidered.
Well,
you
I
could have
know.
saved
Well,
us from
here
this.
we are. So we have a new president on board. And the country is certainly going through a reassessment period here. What's the new system going to be like? Many people are quite surprised. Many people, you would say, are shocked, and other people are elated. And we have a situation where change is coming. And maybe tonight we could discuss, I'm sure President Trump or President-elect Trump is listening in. Maybe we could give him some advice. So what kind of advice do we need to give the future president? And I'll start out by asking what your opinion should be of Hillary Clinton. What would you do about that? Would you appoint a special prosecutor?
Yes.
Would you pardon her? Would you just let it sit there?
Well, if I were in that place, I can imagine 2 or 3 different scenarios. Question number 1: Will President Obama pardon Hillary Clinton before he leaves office on January 20th? You can say, on the one hand, he might not, because the Obamas and the Clintons have never been BFFs, even though he was certainly lobbying for her, campaigning for her in the closing weeks of this campaign to a large extent. So he might not. On the other hand, he might do it for the same reason that Gerald Ford gave for pardoning Nixon, that the long national nightmare is over. We have to start healing. We have to put this behind us. I would say that it would be smartest for Obama, or smarter for Obama, if he did not pardon her, because that would tarnish his reputation in the eyes of a lot of people. Yeah, he doesn't care anymore. He's going to play favorites, obviously. And then, if he does not pardon her, it would be the smarter thing for Trump not to prosecute her, because that would look vindictive. It would look a bit like a banana republic, in that the person who has just upset the favorite goes after her with the legal system that he now controls, even though he's.
Well, now, does he really control that? Maybe we could ask that question. There was a lot of ideas, and with it, one of the things I think the American people want and require is a neutral judicial system. We've spoken about that, and the FBI that's above reproach, and the Justice Department.
Yes.
This is an even-handed Justice
Yes.
Department. So presumably, if there's evidence out there and these investigations are ongoing right now, the decision that was made earlier by the Justice Department, presumably, or by the I guess the idea was the FBI, the Justice Department
Yes.
would normally be the people that would make the decision.
Yes.
So the Justice Department did not make the decision, which is very strange. Instead, it went to the FBI, the head of the FBI, who
Yes.
then made the decision. So does that stop any more inquiry? I mean, would you say, well, that's finished now?
I don't see any way that anyone could argue that in legal criminal procedure language that jeopardy has attached at this point. And so there'd be no double jeopardy issue. So yes, the investigations could certainly be revived. A new special prosecutor to be appointed. The new Attorney General could simply say to the director of the FBI who works for him, give me the Hillary files and I'm going to move forward with this. I'm going to impanel a grand jury. I'm going to get a United States attorney wherever in the Southern District of New York, where Hillary Clinton is a resident and where the server lived, and we're going to go forward with any evidence that you've got and see if the grand jury will indict her.
Now, presumably, my understanding is a grand jury would indict a ham sandwich. Is that what they
Yes,
say?
that's what they
Is that
say.
the joke out there?
Yes.
So once the Justice Department made that decision, and presumably it would not be a direct decision by President Trump, but it would be his minions that did it. Once the decision was made and a grand jury and panel and presumably an indictment would take place, then in many ways the tensions in the country would be substantially exacerbated, would they not? I mean, this would be a criminal trial, and with the criminal possibilities would be huge. I mean, there's an elderly lady in her 70s is going to be there with Madoff with 25-year term.
Yes.
Or I mean, it'd be a pretty shocking turn of events.
Yes.
I mean, for the national psyche to see that happen.
Yes, and I think that's why I'm not saying that I believe Hillary Clinton not guilty. I think our mutual friend Tom Engel has made a very strong case in an earlier show that the reason that James Comey gave, that Director Comey gave for not pursuing this is that he thought that there was not sufficient evidence of intent. That's what he said in his initial.
But that's not what the statute
statement.
says.
The statute does not require intent. One of the statutes requires negligence, which is a much lower standard than intent. And another federal regulation requires no legal state of mind at all. It is what's called a strict liability offense, that if it is done regardless of intent, then you've run afoul of it. And so his whole statement, his initial statement letting Hillary off the hook, to me was completely disingenuous at the time.
Yes.
So I'm not saying this because I believe that Hillary is not guilty. I do believe that a prosecution of Hillary Clinton would do us more harm than good. It would tear us apart even more. It would politicize not just the political system, but the judicial system further. It would be done on the say-so of the man who had beaten Hillary in a very acrimonious
and
election.
lost the popular vote.
And lost the popular vote.
Yes.
So it just, we don't
We
need
have
to
to
go
hope.
there
Well,
so
my
much.
personal hope is that he would not do that. And the other thing I would suggest to him is that if he did not do that, the thing to do is to pardon. I mean, there's a Marine Corps general, there are people that are whatever. I would certainly pardon the people that the statute has given them, that have been nipped.
Yes.
It's certainly not fair to let Hillary off and let those people go to prison. I mean, their crimes are far less. And if Hillary walks, I think that would be the thing to do. If that'd be my suggestion.
Well, that's a good point. And also, but it cuts the other way. I think that Donald Trump has to be given the opportunity not to prosecute. So that's why I say it's important that Obama not pardon her. We have to. That would look political too.
And so you get into the notion of grace, whatever grace is, and if I can understand the concept, it's like there's a contract, and you've broken the contract, and you have the power to punish the person that's broken the contract.
The quality of mercy is mightiest, mightiest in the mightiness.
And you just say, okay, I'm going to even though you've broken the contract, I'm going to let you go.
Yes.
So I mean, I don't know. I hope that something like that could be injected into this conversation.
Yes.
Now, another question is some advice to President Trump. We've talked about Hillary. Should he build the wall? Should he build the wall? Whatever that means, but should he do that? Presumably, he's been the one sort of mantra that he had was, and this propelled him into the White House in many ways, is that he said, all right, I'm going to build the wall, I'm going to make Mexico pay for it. And he said a number of things like that, and that's probably the number one thing that's out there. And can he do that? I mean, is it legal to do that? What does that require? To me, it sounds daunting. So the border is about 2,000 miles long, yes. And the private landowners own property there. I mean, I don't know, the sheep or whether the birds cross over the Rio. I mean, people fish there. I don't know, the frogs jump around in the Rio Grande.
Yes.
I mean, it would be And a lot of it is just very wild. It'd be slightly ridiculous. I mean, some parts of it. I mean, the Big Bend country. I mean, it's just a small stream.
Yes.
Would you have an electrified fence that
Yes.
stretches for 2,000 miles? And I mean, comments. I mean,
Yeah,
well, should he do that? Or
Well, I
what do
think
you
it's two questions. You're asking two questions. Number one, can he do it legally?
And should he?
have the
Can
time?
and
Number
should.
two, should, yes. Yeah, Obama and not Obama, Trump, and I think I'm guessing you'll get to this later in our discussion tonight. Trump can do a lot of things through unilateral executive action. I don't think building a wall is part of it. Even if he could do it with executive action, he'd have to find the funds to do it because it wouldn't be cheap. I think he is going to need the help of Congress to do that if he is really bent on doing that. Congress would have to pass a law, and he'd have to sign it.
Now,
or agree to it.
my understanding is, I mean, he hasn't directly said this, but the way that Mexico would pay for it is that huge amounts of funds are sent back to Mexico by expatriates here. They're here legally, illegally. They've got relatives there. They live in poor villages.
Yes.
So great amounts of money are transferred from the U.S. back to Mexico, and indeed, all across the world, these fund transferences are of great import. Nations like the Philippines, I think they send people to the Middle East.
Yes,
And the story is in Central America, I mean, I'll just tell a story about people I know from Guatemala. There's a small village there. One guy got to the States, and he sends money back to his relatives. They have this huge house, and it sort of demoralized the village. They don't have to work. Everybody else is working. A small amount of money from the U.S. Looking at some countries, they absolutely depend on that money. And so how does the president say, does that require, it seems to me, it would require some act of Congress to say, I'm going to take remittances or the money that goes back.
Surcharge of some sort.
There'll be a surcharge placed
tax.
on money transferred out of the country. Could you just pick one country? It would have to be anywhere. Any funds sent out of the country would be taxed?
I think it could be targeted at specific countries, but of course, you know, if you're talking tax, you're talking congressional.
So you'd have to go through that. But I assume that's the way that he had in mind to have the Mexican. He wouldn't ask them to send money. I don't believe the Mexican government's going to.
Who knows what he was thinking? Well, there's another way as well. You have to, you know, when you're traveling on the New Jersey Turnpike, or if you're going under the Holland Tunnel, you have to pay some money. So could we put a toll on land crossings from Mexico to the United States both ways?
And the other thing to do is, I mean, this gets into a lot of the heart of the populist appeal that President Trump had, and we've sort of discussed this before, comparative advantage, economic comparative advantage. Okay, that's the classic economics 1 teaching. The U.S. is going to be a high-tech place. We're going to manufacture fancy computers and cutting-edge software, and we're going to let some other country make the shoes or whatever, or some basic T-shirts. We're going to let someone else make T-shirts and manufacture shoes, and we'll be the high-tech. The problem is that the job issue that occurs is that it's true enough we have this excellent part, but relatively few people benefit. So the idea is that NAFTA transferred huge numbers of working jobs to Mexico, where it's much less expensive. The labor costs are much less. So to correct that, the idea would be to I guess, stop NAFTA, and at the same time I mean, maybe you could put tariffs on Mexican goods and use them and the tariffs to construct the wall. Is that another idea that he has? And could he do that unilaterally? Could he just stop NAFTA unilaterally?
Well, yes, once again, I mean, it's a treaty. I believe it's actually a treaty, and there's probably, I haven't read NAFTA, but there's probably something in there by which the president, as the person in charge of enforcing this, can give notice that he's going to get out of the treaty. It probably does not have to go back to the Senate to do that. If it's simply an executive agreement, then yes, clearly, one president can enter into an executive agreement, and a good example of this would be the Iran nuclear deal. That is not a treaty, clearly not a treaty. And so Trump can simply say, no, I'm out of this. I don't know of any reason under municipal law why he can't do that. So yes, I think that's possible with NAFTA. Would it be advisable? I don't know. And this is, you remember that Hillary Clinton was standing up for free trade. The one percenters, the people who run and own America's corporations, Free trade works for them because it lowers their labor costs. It's not good for Main Street. It's not good for the blue-collar worker because their jobs are
well, I
excluded.
mean, if you go to Walmart, I mean, allegedly, one of the things that's kept our inflation rate low is the Chinese have shipped over all kinds of inexpensive goods, and so there is the inflation. I mean, I think a lot of the goods are cheaper. I mean, it's not totally. It's not a total downside for just for everybody. I mean, there's some advantages. There's some advantages across the board.
Yes. Well, short term, I agree. It does indeed lower prices, but it does mean a hemorrhage of money out of the country into the coffers of our competitors, both our economic competitors and perhaps long-term our political military competitors.
But what's supposed to happen, well, so that's another issue, but allegedly when the capital flows out, it produces income that then comes back, which we get everywhere we turn, we're getting into issues that President Trump is going to deal with. One of it is bringing the money back from overseas, but before we maybe discuss that, we could ask another emotionally loaded question: is what about the undocumented or aliens, whatever turn of phrase you want to use? Are they lawbreakers? Are they poor people? And then President Trump has said, and I think he's backpedaled on this, well, we have 11 million people. By the way, I question that number. So we hear these numbers tossed
if they're
about.
undocumented, how do you know?
I think there's a big question as to what actually the number is or is not. And so when people toss that number out, I'm not sure anyone knows what the correct number is. And there's also traffic back and forth. So maybe everyone goes home for the holidays. So the number drops to 10 million, and then I don't know if well, the question is, what can the president do? We can and should. Can the president just unilaterally say, I want there are 11 million lawbreakers in the country. I'm going to mobilize the National Guard. I'm going to go into wherever, anywhere. I'm going in particularly to these refugee cities. What are they called? The sanctuary cities, right?
Sanctuary
All right,
cities.
I'm mobilized the National Guard. We're going into Denver, Colorado, a sanctuary, or shall we say San Francisco.
Chicago is another.
That's amusing to consider it, right? So federal troops go in there door to door. They're trying to find people. People are hiding in drain pipes and whatever. Well, all right. Can he do that?
Yes.
Can he do that?
Yes. Well, I would like to, even before we get to that, I would like to preface my statements with something I said on the show before, because I think it needs to be said, that these immigrants, both legal immigrants and illegal immigrants, and I will use that phrase, provide a huge economic of huge economic importance to the United States.
That's true.
They do the scut work. They do the jobs that you and I would not condescend to do. They contribute to the economy. And in a way, they are the most real Americans because they are coming to this new frontier and they are working like crazy. They're doing what made America great, even the illegal ones.
You know what? My experience with patients, I mean, I'll second that, Bucky. I see many patients. There are lots of reasons for that, but one reason is that people that come to the emergency room, they're never asked about such issues. So I see, covered in a busy emergency room, I have a big city hospital. I see many people that are illegal immigrants, and I've found them to be extremely nice, stoic, just very nice people. I mean, they are. I mean, I don't know how the world's going to go in the long run, but certainly the people that have crossed over, they're sort of wonderful people. They travel 3,000 miles, and I mean, that's a fair statement.
And I think that was what I'm trying to get at, that I don't want what we say here to be taken as an attempt to denigrate their economic contribution to America or their dignity as human beings. That being said, they are here illegally. They jumped the queue. They didn't go through the process that other people that I know had to go through a torturous process of getting their green cards.
Yeah, it's terrible experience.
And on top of that, the danger of that is they will not be socialized into the American civil religion, the respect for the rule of law, the apolitical nature of the police, this sort of thing. And that some of them, being under the radar, may feel freer to commit criminal acts. So,
well, we're kind of in the should. What about can? Can he just say, I'm sitting in the National Guard in Chicago, anybody without, I'm going to enforce the law? The Border Patrol says, we're 600,000, I'm mobilizing everybody. the law will be he could presumably.
There are laws on the books, and
he could do it.
And this is one of the big criticisms of Obama, simply saying there's a law on the books and I refuse to enforce it because I don't like it. That should not be the president's
So he could just
call.
enforce the law and something could happen.
Yes, he's got a pen and he's got a phone and he can use it. Now there are limits to what he can do. Posse Comitatus Act, he cannot use the national military of the United States to enforce municipal law.
Is that right? Tell me about that.
Well,
I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, well, it's civilian control of the military. Only if there is a complete breakdown of civil authority.
Well, you can declare martial law.
Well,
could you not?
yeah, and that's the thing. I think the courts would say you can declare it all you want to, but it's a reality or not, quite apart from whether or not it's declared. There has to be a reality of the courts have failed, the U.S. Marshals have all been shot and killed. The best example of when you had, in 1861, the entire Southern Confederacy saying, we hereby refuse to admit they were even part of the United States anymore.
Yeah.
And Lincoln had to use the Army because he was facing, in his words, combinations too great to be dealt with by the ordinary authorities. Now, the National Guard is a slightly different creature. The National Guard is part of the militia ideal. You are actually in what is called the unorganized Georgia militia.
I'm glad to hear that. Right?
Yes. So in the extreme, we could be called upon to enforce the law of Georgia. So the National Guard has that law enforcement dimension to it, but the Guard doesn't work for the president. The Guard works for the governor, unless the president federalizes the Guard, calling it a national service. But in that case, I think that posse comitatus would apply to it.
Well, I want to get much off the subject, but I will say that I've seen that in the student demonstrations of the 60s, I was an observer in any event.
Yes.
And I saw the Virginia State Riot Act enforced.
Yes.
So out of the blue, I mean, it was a relatively peaceful situation.
Yeah.
More or less, the governor of Virginia, as I understand it, declared martial law.
Yes.
With, I would say unnecessarily, but he did that, and the state, and so it.
Now, was this on the UVA campus?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
It was. It was. It's a long story, but it seemed unnecessary. But Kent State issues, and it happened everywhere.
Yes.
But in any event, to get back to the subject, the question is, should the you made an argument he should do that. He should. It's I think it's really complicated. It's a real, I mean, I'd have to, if I were president, I'd stay up long and late about that. I think he said, well, I'm going to send back criminals. Mm-hmm. And surprisingly, there are several million criminals out there that are, if I can believe that, several million people with criminal records among the 11 million. I'm not sure where these numbers come from.
Yes.
So it's going to be a very tough thing to do. And what we're getting into a little bit here, Bucky, is President Trump has made all these campaign promises, and every one of them are just tremendously difficult things.
Yes.
Maybe we can flip just briefly to one thing that apparently he can do with the stroke of a pen, and that's the treaty with Iran, which is a huge...
Which isn't a treaty.
Yeah. The agreement. So he can just say, that's it.
Dead letter.
And that has that's a tremendous geopolitical thing to do. I mean, that really is, as far as the geopolitical structure in the world, I mean, I have to wonder what the impact of that would be. So there are 5 or 6 or 7 things that are out there.
Climate change agreements, the Paris Accords.
Yes, but I mean, that would be something. Now, another thing was, I guess you're going through like a lot of advice here, is the tax structure and the idea of bringing money back in. There seem to be, some of these things seem slightly reasonable to me. There's all these trillions of dollars overseas that companies have, and there's a way to change the tax structure and get that money back. That seems to be something that is an accomplishable thing. The tax code would have to be revised, but he would depend on Congress to do that.
Yes, and the tax code, of course, is a very complex thing, and our tax code's starting to get pretty old. The last major overhaul was back during the Reagan years, so it's absolutely Byzantine. But once again, Congress would have to be involved. Specifically, that would almost certainly have to start in the House, because revenue bills have to be in the House of Representatives, which raises the question of, are Donald Trump and Paul Ryan going to sit down to a love feast just because they're both Republicans or both claim to be Republicans?
Good question. And some people would say that Donald Trump's really not a Republican. They would say that. They make that comment. Well, And so collaboration and cooperation with Congress is a big deal. And just looking at the task that's out there, this is really, just everywhere. My family, I'm going to ask one other question, and then maybe we sort of wind things up a little bit. Obamacare. So the idea is that that President Trump is just going, a lot of this apparently is depending on executive orders. He's going to go through and strike down huge numbers of executive orders. I think the mandate, can that be stricken? I don't know some things that are, it's just going to be a non-functional document.
Yes.
And he'd have to be, and presumably he could do a lot just to make it non-functional pretty acute.
Yes, there are certainly a great deal of administrative regs that have come out under the Obama administration pursuant to the Affordable Care Act that Trump can just say they're gone. Probably the most controversial one, and being a civil libertarian here, was the HHS mandate that attempted to say that if you are a religious organization, then you have to provide contraceptive insurance for your employees. Well, that runs afoul of 2,000 years of Catholic doctrine. That can be gone now.
So, apparently we get sort of the conclusion of this, but one of the things that could happen are the thousands of regulations that have been propagated by executive order, administrative fiat, and just thousands of them. And so presumably President Trump's going to appoint many people.
Yes.
And so the whole federal register could be enormously, just hugely changed. So what we're finally getting into is this. The idea that all this change is possible. There could be 100 days of just radical change in the country. And some people would argue, well, the Democrats made radical changes with a minority situation just in the same way we are,
yes.
And this is our chance to do it. And other people would say 100 days right now with the world the way it is, and any of those decisions could have just firing a shotgun at the geopolitical world there, yes. And all the complicated issues involved with the economic underpinning of the world, just fire a shotgun at it. You could really, and estrange everyone in the street. There's already a lot of tension that you have a big problem doing that. Or the argument that I sort of spoke about earlier is, well, now we can do something. This is the last chance we'll ever have to do something. After we do it, then the country will accept it.
Yes.
How would you come down on that,
yes.
between those two possibilities?
Well, I think in foreign policy, Trump, it doesn't have to be in a rush. The president has always had greater leeway, greater autonomy when it comes to foreign affairs. And so there doesn't have to be the 100-day rush there. He can afford to be a little bit more deliberative. Now, the honeymoon with Congress, a rather different matter. One thing we haven't mentioned in our closing minutes here is there are already 2 vacancies on the Securities Exchange Commission. Another one has just been announced. And next year, Janet Yellen's term ends at the Fed, and there's another vacancy at the Fed about 6 months after that. So this is going to give Trump the possibility, with the support of Senate Republicans, if they give it to him, of packing the SEC and causing the Fed to change directions. So that's another big element here.
And so the president has these possibilities.
Yes.
Well, I mean, in general, I'll say, what should guide the president right now? His political promises, or should he just say, well, I've got to weigh these things very, very carefully, or I'm a doctrinaire guy, I'm just going to, and it depends on his temperament. It's been said he didn't have the temperament. And actually, on the show, we criticized him here. I mean, I hope you don't take that personally, President Trump. Don't take it personally. Don't be mean to us.
Yes.
But,
I would say if I were in that situation, quite regardless of where I stand on Trump's agenda, my impulse would be to act quickly and get as much done unilaterally in the 100 days as possible. Don't reach out, run the table, because the demographics are against the Republican Party in the long run. If he doesn't do it, and do it very soon, it will never, as in the next century, never get done. So that would be my advice. Now, that is not going to make the opposition happy. It's not going to make the Democrats happy, and it may not make the Republican establishment happy. But that's his best chance of achieving a lasting influence.
Yes. Well, demographics are a difficult thing to joust with,
Yes.
and particularly in a democratic system. The demographics determine things in the end, so maybe it's a fool's errand to try and change the course of the ship. But
Indeed.
we shall see. Well, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Stephen. Thank you a lot, Bucky. Thanks.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.